So, Dr. David, thank you so much. We see a lot of panic here and all over the world. You know, I was scheduled to travel to the US, but my hosts suggest that I shouldn't come. So, there's a lot happening with coronavirus all around us. So, what is your take on it? And especially, we'd like to really understand how it's going to affect the food supply chain. So, how do you see this?
Yeah, it's it's a big deal. And what, of course, is frightening is we don't know how big a deal it will be and how it will just emerge. And so we always fear, or often fear, the unknown. But in terms of its sort of impact on the food industry, I think it has huge impact, and at various levels. I mean, first of all, let's just look at where it started, where the virus grew, where was its genesis, and in China, and where it is still a relatively big deal. I mean, in terms of if you were exporting to China, then very quickly, and I've been talking to my contacts, not least in Australia and New Zealand, where suddenly the tap was turned off, that consumers retired to their houses, were not shopping. Of course, they could buy online, and that was happening big time. Suddenly, you saw this great spike on online shopping for food. But for example, let me give you a seafood example. That if you take in South Africa, they have been exporting live lobster to China for the last 5, 7, 10 years, and it is far and away their premium market. Well, within a week of the coronavirus happening, then the demand from China decreased by 90%, 90%. And the market for live lobster in South Africa collapsed. So currently, the live lobster price in South Africa is a third what it was, say, 2 months ago. Similarly, let's move to, say, New Zealand, where it's the high value fresh produce being sold, cherries, for example. The minute there is a problem in the Chinese market, then there's a huge problem for exporters. And what does that tell me? It's and I've been talking about it for years. I've been saying the Chinese market can make you and it can break you, and it's been really seductive. A bit like a drug. That you just sort of get onto the Chinese market and say, aha, that's all we need, because when they want it, their demand is just inexhaustible. But then suddenly, bang, it's turned off, and you're left with where can I move my product? And that is a sort of big issue, I think. So that's one. Two, of course, China is an exporter itself. In fact, it's a massive exporter of agribusiness, particularly ingredients. And they have suddenly stopped going because everything just ground to a halt. I've no doubt they'll sort of pick up. I think so. As an exporter, the issues there, same with car parts and the like, that is short to early medium term. But then as they get a handle on the virus, as they seem to be doing now, then then you will start to see Chinese product and food products coming back into our marketplace. However, I think there's a sort of wider concern that, again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with it. But if it gets a hold, if coronavirus gets a hold globally, and a big time hold, then it will reduce global GDP, global gross domestic product. And that means it will reduce household incomes. And when household incomes are reduced, particularly in emerging countries where those incomes are relatively low, then they can't afford the new products and the treats and the improved dietary products that they were just starting to get used to. And so they'll go back and focus on the staples. And so I think there'll be a big deal. Let's take another slice, and actually it's very close to my heart, that my son has a restaurant in the southwest of England. And then you think, on the one hand, we can see from a UK point of view, you'll get less people traveling overseas because they're concerned about the virus in Italy, for example, where it's a huge issue at the moment. So, they may stay for the holidays and use restaurants more at home. But if, again, the virus really takes hold here, then they won't go out. And so it's going to hurt a lot of businesses, and particularly small businesses that just don't have the cash flow. It'll be interesting to see whether the government and whether financial institutions, in the midst of what could be chaos, actually address what will be genuine problems for many, many businesses. And I think that is about cash flow. So no, I think it's a big deal.
Thank you so much. This is very educative. So you think in the short term it would impact the Asian food supply chains more than the Western and African food supply chains?
Yeah, yes. But again, it depends on the rate at which this expands. And for example, in Africa, I mean, I'm not sure if coronavirus is an issue in Africa or whether there is insufficient information as yet for us even to make that statement. And again, as we know, that if you're in countries where the health system is struggling to cope with existing health problems, this additional big bang of a virus problem can just be explosive. And what is clear is it just spreads very quickly. But actually, again, if you think from an African perspective, that in many countries, Africa is a huge importer of food, and that will continue. But actually, for many rural-based Africans, and that is still the majority of Africans, the food supply is largely local, and that is less likely to have an adverse impact.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking about. Like in certain countries, take the case of India, for example. If the same situation, if the chaotic situation arises in a country like that, where the healthcare system is not possibly as good as that in China, then the repercussions to the whole system will be much higher, isn't it? Including the food system.
Yeah. I think it's no. We need to be talking about this at the same time. We're crossing our fingers and hoping that that in the medium term we know there'll be a vaccine, and it's how do we cope in the meantime? And as I say, whenever these things happen, it's normally the small people that suffer.
Right.
It's low income and small businesses that suffer.
That take the hit.
Mind you, in history, they've also been incredibly resilient.
Right.
So
that brings me to this. Yeah, that brings me to this next question, which is a nice follow-up to it. So when you look at it from a supply chain perspective, then I think sooner or later, you talked about the lobster example, but sooner or later, I think there will be some sort of a pressure on the upstream of the supply chain, like growers, for example. So what do you see happening for the Asian growers versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm happy to talk about Asia, but let's start more global. I think these sort of issues make the world think much more seriously and sensibly about issues such as food security. We've been used to. Let's give an example, say, from the car industry, but then we can relate it to food. But in the car industry, where does China produce cars to export elsewhere? No, but they produce parts of cars, and then if they can't export them, or if it's not working well in China, then it's very quickly it becomes an issue in Newcastle, where they may be putting them to, in the northeast of England, where they might be putting those cars together. And to some extent, we see that too in food, where we've just got used to this constantly just pulling food from around the world. Some countries more than others, actually. For example, I'm talking from the UK. In the UK, we only produce 65% of our food, so we import 35%. And the assumption is that it's always there. It'll just be ready when we want it. And then it's like occasions like this when you think, oh, or maybe not. And so you start to reassess. And I think governments will reassess about their degree to which they see food self-sufficiency as being a bona fide policy objective, because it became unfashionable. No, we don't have to do that because we can just import it. But I think increase, and as it happens, that's in tune with a lot of consumer trends that I see, where around the world, whether it be in Asia or what, that in general, that consumers have more faith in the local product. That's not always the case. So, for example, in China, it wasn't the case with milk powder, where it was exactly the opposite of that. But still, they like to see, that sort of. I think it's quite healthy as we start to reconnect with food, and people start to relearn simple things like seasonality, and that they say we want our food when it's in season because then it's at its best. And I think that's good. So what would you advise to growers in Asia and other parts of the world? I mean, celebrate your own food production and communicate what you do. Communicate the story of your food with your local consumers. They're probably going to be your best customers. For many countries, you still, of course, you've got to have export customers, but make sure you look after those domestic consumers. They're probably the most loyal, the most forgiving, often as not. But then, if you've got a good story about what you do and how you do it, then make sure you tell it to your own customers, but also to your export customers, because again, right round the world, that consumers want to know the story of food, and what they mean by that is, where do the ingredients come from? How do you produce them? Can I feel secure about it? Do I feel good about it? So yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff happening in the food industry. The more consumers know, understand, learn about food, the better. I think.
Right. So it's an interesting case for local sourcing, local production, local
Yes.
growers that are ready from a marketing branding perspective. I think.
Yes. Yeah. I think so. I think there are real opportunities for them. There, real opportunities. Yeah.
And also, I think if we look at the case of low-income countries that are less self-sufficient in food, this is an alarming bell, isn't it, in that sense? Because
yes, it is. I mean, I think from an African perspective, the issue is how you can get a start. How local farmers can get a start. Let's take poultry, for example. If you don't have a modern poultry industry in your country, in an African country, for example, and are starting from scratch, it's really difficult to get it off the ground when you're faced with sometimes dump product from, say, the US, sometimes astonishingly low cost product from Brazil. And so then you can see the tussle that governments have, where on the one hand they want to support infant industries, so-called, but at the same time they have to look after the interests of poor consumers. And so how do you make that balance? It was ever thus like that. That's always been the tussle.
Right. So then I think you have addressed part of this question, which is like going downstream in the value chain. So you expect possibly greater concerns at the processing level, because possibly a product processor for a single product, the ingredients are coming from several countries, and you don't know. As you gave a very nice analogy of car assembly example, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
do you want to add anything to that for this
Well,
question?
I think so. I think it's particularly important because if you went back 10, 15 years ago, as I say in my talks, that most consumers around the world were largely disinterested, not interested in where ingredients came from.
Mm.
It was, that wasn't the issue because they were buying a product which had a brand, and they bought that brand because they had trust in that brand. And so, in their mind's eye, they'll be saying to the Unilevers of this world, or the Mars, we leave it up to you to source the ingredients which make these fine products, and we trust that you will do it in a way that meets our expectations. But I think that's changed. And what's more, big food companies recognize that it's changed because, and now let's take the African example with regard to cocoa. The principal ingredient in chocolate, or a principal ingredient in chocolate. That now consumers, particularly higher income consumers, are saying, well, how did you treat that cocoa farmer? And how did he produce that cocoa? How did she produce the cocoa? So it gives big food companies less latitude to just switch to new suppliers, because they've made, as part of their story, the partnerships they've developed with farmers in distant parts of the world, small scale farmers in West Africa who are essentially peasant cocoa growers. And you can't just say, not available there because there's been an issue there, we'll just buy it from, I don't know, Indonesia. No, that's so what's happened, we've got these tighter supply chains, shorter supply chains. And as a result of that, security of supply becomes more of an issue. And I think the big food companies have to take a much bigger interest even in the farm level production, because it's partly their responsibility to ensure that the small scale farming of cocoa is sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, of course, in the longer term, if it's not, they don't have a business. But in the short term, they've got it's in their interest to look after the interests of small scale farmers. In history, that was just not on their agenda because they say we can always swap and go somewhere else. I think those days have gone. They've largely gone.
Right. In several of your presentations, you bring out this story of sustainability and profitability interlinked. You give the examples of Nestle, Unilever,
Yes.
and I think it's majorly driven by sustainable sourcing, isn't it? That whole story is driven by.
Yes, it is. But it's so always intrigued me that I don't consider myself an agricultural production expert, but I work right along the supply chain from consumer all the way back to farm, and it sort of always intrigued me how businesses, food processing businesses, and then also farm businesses would be so resistant to change in what they do about becoming greener, for example. And yet, most of it is sort of business common sense, like using less electricity, reducing your herbicide and pesticide usage. I mean, that's what consumers want. And you think that's what farmers want, because those inputs are very expensive. But I've just, as an observation, that I've noticed that the initial reaction often of farmers is, no, we can't do it, in a hand, no, can't do it. And then they do it. And then you say, why didn't you just do it a little earlier? Because actually we get sort of stuck in our way. All sorts of businesses do that.
Well, I think it's the pressure from different sides, isn't it? Like the dealer who is selling the agro inputs that is closest to the farmer is trying to threaten them, or possibly threatening them, that if you don't use this quantity, this amounts, your crop is going to not harvest, right? Like, and then
Yeah.
because the more they buy, the better it is for them, right? So it's that kind of a
Yeah,
vicious circle.
but I think yes, there's that, but also I think that it's this resistance to change that from a farmer point of view, to become to reduce your inputs, but at the same time to maintain your output,
Yeah,
is a learning process, and people are resistant to learn. No, I'm
right,
going to do it as I've always done it. It's just
right.
easier that way,
No, it's yeah,
yet particularly small scale farmers, I think they're really cute. They get it. I think they get it quicker than large scale farmers.
right,
And I tell you why, because they've got less resources.
right,
Yeah,
absolutely,
because they a penny, a cent means something to them.
right, absolutely.
If I can save it, how can I save it?
Right, right. And on the retail side, I mean, expecting that retail will see a lot of retail will pay a lot of attention to the whole development, I guess, in this context, isn't it? So, what is your take on it, and what is the role of retail, you think, in this whole situation?
Right. I mean, I'll make a general comment in a minute, but just going back to coronavirus, in every example I've seen, what's happened is that the initial reaction of consumers is to say, I'm not going to go to a supermarket, I'm going to buy online. And so online has spiked in every country. And I'd be interested to see, as we move away from this crisis, as we will, that it may well be it's going to take us. It may take us 12 months to move away from this crisis, to see whether people go back to old habits, or more likely, a proportion will say, actually, that was a better way to do something. Why do I have to queue up, sit in the traffic, be abused by other drivers and by supermarket staff? So, I think we'll see habits change. But in general, when we talk about, what about retail? I was just mentioning it in a talk I gave on pork recently, saying, look, if you went back 10 years ago, in most countries, the issue was often for farmers, they would sort of curse under their breath and say, bloody retailers, they've got too much power. It's all about the supermarket chains. They're going to dominate. And, if I look now, I just see their power has clearly peaked. In many cases, they're struggling, particularly younger consumers, and right across the world. This isn't a high income European, North American thing. This is right across the world that younger consumers are saying, actually, to feed ourselves and our family, you can do it a different way than going to a supermarket and buying ingredients. And so, it's that online, whether it be online to deliver a restaurant meal, or online to deliver a snack, or online to deliver my groceries, is just, I think in Asia, that's where you're seeing the growth. They're way, way quicker than we are here. Here being Europe and North America too. Actually, the UK is ahead of the game on grocery online relative to most developed countries, but it's still low. And you've just got to go to Asia. And I'm always amused and sometimes appalled in Thailand, where there's something like 8,000 7-Eleven convenience stores. And convenience stores are supposed to be stores which are convenient. And
Right.
now
They become
the,
mainstream.
it's mainstream. And what's more, 7-Eleven convenience store products are being picked up by motorcycle drivers and taken to homes.
Yeah.
So, from a consumer point of view in Asia, they're saying the convenience store isn't convenient. What is convenient is somebody just delivering it to my door.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and so, in terms of development of 21st century retailing, there's much more to see in Asia than there is in North America or Europe. And it's that instant convenience that it'll be intriguing to see how we work out what is the environmental impact of that, because
Right.
we're still sort of trying to work the way, is it sustainable to have a zillion small motorcycles zipping around? But if I think about it, it probably is, because motorcycles suddenly become solar bikes.
Right.
And
Right.
then what you're using then is a pool of relatively low cost labor who are willing to work for less, and it gives them a job. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
so
And possibly, I mean, these are two very interesting points. One is related to the adoption of online retail being higher in the low income markets, because there is the retail infrastructure, the front end retail infrastructure is not as well developed as here, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not an experience of sorts. The second interesting point, and I think, I mean, I'm always keen on following the logistics side of the supply chain, um, because almost always the deliveries happen at the cost of, to replace other trips, right? Like, so if the bike is not coming, then you are taking your car to the supermarket, right? So
yes,
in
yes, yeah,
that sense, I don't see, if the number of trips are multiplied just because you're placing an online order, then it's a totally slightly different
yeah,
economics. But I think, otherwise, I see that to be more efficient than uh, um, than the retail aspect of it. So
yeah,
typically, retailing moves to warehousing, isn't it? In like
yeah.
Amazon does, for example.
No, no, exactly. And it's and again, it's oh, and hang on. Here's another coronavirus issue. It's for somebody who's been around uh, Asian wet markets for as long as I have, and if you looked at their relative strength, and the the sort of traditional view is that the traditional wet market will take a long time to lose its share, particularly for fresh produce and for fresh meat. Well, what is clear in China is that a coronavirus outbreak
Hmm.
will just squeeze the role of the traditional wet market.
No, I have seen that happen in India too, because if you look at younger generations,
Yeah,
they're very conscious of the hygiene factor. They're really
absolutely.
conscious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're right. Same in China, where the millennials that I meet and that I'm always in contact with say they don't want to go to those dirty wet markets. Why
Yeah,
would I go
exactly.
there? My mother goes there, but I would never go there. So,
Um,
but in general, it's sort of interesting in so-called more developed markets. So in higher income countries, uh, where supermarkets have dominated fresh produce and fresh meat, for example, in the uh, online grocery world, it's fresh foods which are the slowest to move online,
mm, mm,
and uh, and I think that's about habit, but it's also about trust.
right.
That and often lack of trust, that consumers are saying, I don't trust the supermarket to select the right quality of product for me
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it comes to fresh foods.
Right.
Uh, but again, I think there's an age element to that. I know within my own family, whereas, say, Susan Hughes, say an over 60-year-old will say, no, I want to select my own fresh produce. Whereas a 40-year-old son will say, well, why wouldn't we allow the supermarket to do that? Isn't that their job? And that just, but it's an issue of trust or lack of trust.
Right, right. And I think there is this factor that you always mention, which is like, um, possibly the fresh produce in its fresh form will cease to exist over time, right? It's all prepared meals. It's all about
Yeah, yeah,
more convenience. So as more convenience goes
yeah,
into the game, as more processing or minimal processing goes in,
yeah.
then the whole game is very different, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. No, and it's sort of interesting because people like the idea of having the original article uh, unprocessed. But as I mentioned in my talks, if it's not convenient to prepare, if it's not convenient, best example I've got is me relatively recently in Cambodia, where I was in the traditional market. It was a lovely example. There was uh, a woman selling pineapples, and I was looking at the pineapple and thinking, I'd love a pineapple. But then I thought to myself, but then how will I, be too messy to prepare. So I said to her, thanks very much, but it would be too messy to prepare. And she looked at me as if I was stupid and said, but I can prepare it. And in, I don't know, 10 seconds, she went, and she'd cut that pineapple into perfect little squares, put them in a wee bag for them, and handed them over to me. That's sort of ideal, because that gives you this is the straight off the tree, and now I've got it in the form that I wanted. But often as not, of course, you can't replicate that in the supermarket.
Yeah.
So,
No,
you can't. Yeah.
because I follow the food waste and you stress a lot on food waste. So I did an experiment at home where I looked at I mean, generally there's not too much of food waste that happens at home, but I did an experiment to see what kind of food gets wasted, and it's almost always the fresh products that needs
Yes.
preparation. It's never the ready meal. It's never the
No.
prepared stuff. It's never the convenient stuff.
No. Actually, in European and North American households, the product which is most frequently wasted is bread,
Yeah.
where you over purchase and then quote it's stale. Second comes fresh produce, where it's at the back of the fridge and then not used, and then it's quietly disposed of. And
Right.
it's sort of interesting, but you can see because food waste is becoming such an issue. I think what I see as a real positive is that those who have few or little cooking skills, actually, it's not a big leap to explain how you can minimize fresh produce waste by suddenly turning it into soup.
Yeah.
Chop it all up, put it in a saucepan, and and then you have that sort of good feeling that you have cooked, that
Right.
you've actually done something from scratch. So, but no, food waste, that is a big issue, and we will be addressing it. And of course, just as you did, before you can really understand it's a big issue, you've got to measure it,
Yeah.
and we're getting better at measuring it.
Right. Right. No, very, very good points, Dr. David. So coming back to the coronavirus and the policy role, I mean, you talked about food insecurity and then, such events, whether it is this sort of a virus events, but also even climate events can have a huge impact on the availability and accessibility of food locally, right, in a regionally.
Yeah.
So, what is the role of policy you think in this whole picture, especially policy connected to food supply chains, food and ag supply chains?
Right. I mean, I think this is a big area. Uh, how can one start? I mean, let's start with something I often talk about: this sort of climate-friendly diets. Clearly, this is a big deal, and what's more, I just see it growing, and that's distinct from climate change. But so there's so so, uh, but it's clearly also linked. Climate-friendly diets being, what is the impact on the climate of the foods that I'm eating? And I think quite clearly there is pressure from special interest groups, increasingly from government, but now from consumers, that we must globally address this. And that means changing what we eat. And that's difficult to do because if I look at dietary change, we do change what we eat, but often it takes 40, 50 years to do so, where you'll see slowly something will go out of fashion or favor and slowly drift down. But it takes us a long time because we're creatures of habit. But we're going to see policies put in place by government and indeed supported by the food industry itself to accelerate the move towards more climate-friendly diets globally. The subtext for that is that it has implications for meat, because the perceived villain is particularly red meats, and to a lesser extent, not to a less, and also dairy. But actually, back to something I mentioned before, never underestimate the ability of farmers to respond. And I would suggest that if we take something like the greenhouse gas emissions related to beef production and to dairy production, that move forward 20 years, then it will be substantially less than it is now. And so there will be less villainous, if you will. So that's the climate-friendly, planet-friendly diets. Then we have the reality of climate change. And what does that bring? Changes in food production. So there'll be areas of the world where we are growing stuff now, and we won't be able to grow them in that area in 20 years' time, 30 years' time. We just won't be able to do it. Although, again, don't underestimate the ability of farmers to respond. I mean, I think if I have a little sub-example for that is look where you get innovation. You get innovation where there's stress. And so where was the really beginning of high science-led irrigation, like drip irrigation, etc.? Israel.
Yeah.
And why Israel? Because they didn't have any water. And so they just spoonful by spoonful. And that's what climate change will bring. It will bring an acceleration of science focusing on areas which are particularly stressed.
Yeah.
And so we have this capacity to actually, we can respond. I mean, I think the big issue is that we need to accelerate the rate at which we do this.
Yeah.
Because we have this habit of only changing when we absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And the trouble is with, I think, the global climate, that from a local point of view, that last minute change may be too late.
Yeah.
From a global perspective.
Right.
Those ice sheets have just disappeared into the sea at the poles, and and we have a big issue, and one that is at a different level than our current coronavirus issue.
Right. Well, I think we are generally designed to overestimate risks in certain cases and underestimate risks in certain other cases. I guess the risks that are not familiar or that are not So I think this coronavirus situation points to that direction, isn't it? Like it was coming for a while. Then it was not seen as a global problem. It was a China problem, and then so it's
but again, Dr. Vijay, it was ever thus. And if you look at our perception of risk, that we accept that something is risky, like driving a car is risky. We understand that. That's very risky. Right? Look at the statistics. It's very risky, but not for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's risky for all that lot, but not for me, because I'm a very good and careful driver. And clearly that's irrational, but that's the way we operate.
That's the way I operate. Yeah, indeed. So I think it's a too short in time for any policy level adjustments from a coronavirus point of view, I guess. So I think they should possibly use this as a lesson to see, okay, what can we do? How can we prepare for such events going forward,
Yeah.
possibly?
As I said, I think if things like coronavirus, they make a better case for more self-sufficiency
Yeah.
and less reliance on international supply chains.
Right. Right.
That doesn't mean that the world will become, small agriculture in your own country, but it's a stark reminder to policymakers
Right.
that they can't take availability of food for granted.
For granted. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did another session on the UK vegetable crisis, right? The European vegetable crisis
Yeah,
a couple of
yeah,
years back, and
yeah,
you have been very specific in that podcast that but then it's easily forgotten, isn't it, Dr. David? The moment that
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yes, I remember that well. That's the outrage of consumers that lettuce and cucumbers were 3 times the price in January and February than they had been the week before. And when you explained that had been a crop disaster in Spain, it was no, it's the supermarkets, they're
yeah, exactly. But
and
but
then
then nothing changes, in terms of the value chains, value chain designs, how they operate. Then it's brushed off as a one-off event, isn't it? Like, I mean,
yes,
it
yeah,
won't happen
yeah.
again. It won't happen again. Like that kind of a hopeful or wishful thinking, I would
No,
think.
no, exactly. We're uh, always optimistic. That's well,
Right.
maybe that's the nature of, but just as well, perhaps in some respect. However,
Optimistic about things that and pessimistic about things which could work better, right? Like, as you rightly said, there are lots of solutions that could be adopted and could be used progressively to address these challenges. But adoption clearly is a big challenge at every front. So finally, then, Dr. David, I won't hold you for longer. You have already finished a couple of sessions and then attending to this podcast. Thank you so much. So finally, for consumers, at the level of consumers, because I heard I was in touch with some of the people in the US, and they were saying that the people are queuing in Costco's to stock their to
yeah.
stock their home. So I was just curious, from a consumer's perspective, do you think that from a food perspective, is there a panic situation? What is it that they could do or they should be doing?
Yeah. Well, it's in our nature to do that. I've been following the same news feeds too. It's sort of intriguing. It's the usual suspects. It's canned food, uh, uh, toilet paper, by the dozen. Uh, that's in our nature. It will happen here too, and then it will sort of move on. It's just the system is capable of adapting. However, I mean, I'm of an age where just I can remember rationing. So immediate post Second World War, finished in
Sure.
1945. In the UK, food rationing did not finish until 1954.
Hmm.
And I mean, I wouldn't put it out of your mind that if there is a prolonged crisis and if there are genuine problems relating to food supply, then it's the government's responsibility to ensure that its peoples are
Everyone
fed.
eats. Yeah, everyone eats.
And that's an extreme food rationing, and that in itself is a useful lesson for many people,
Right.
because for most people under the age of about 50, they can't even spell the word ration and
Rationing.
understand
Right.
what it's
Right.
about. The assumption is that it's always available, and if it's too pricey, we'll just complain. But if there are big issues, then related to food security, then who knows what will happen. I don't think that's going to happen
Right.
here, but
But
that's the.
But I think an interesting question, maybe you may not have a very validated answer to this, but how long do you think the supply chains can cope for extreme situations? Now, assuming that if the virus goes on spreading for the way it is, so how long can we cope the food supply chains without getting disrupted?
Right. In our industry, probably longer than other industries, I would suggest. I'm not sure if I'm addressing this correctly, but if there was a prolonged period where the movement of people was heavily constrained, then just think of some industries and sectors that would be decimated.
Right, like the
International travel,
conference,
conferences, international travel, tourism, etc., where that's your
hospitality.
business, and then suddenly you have no customers.
Yeah.
So for food, as I said, it depends how you're placed nationally in terms of access to food. And again, don't underestimate the. You might have to see changes in diet, and in itself, that's not a bad thing too. In terms of a lesson, it's a lesson that might be learned hard, which is that it's just not available. Oh, what do we do? Well, there are alternatives. It's
right.
And
Right.
so yeah. No,
So
at least we're.
let's
Let's
hope that
hope.
none of the worst case scenarios we have discussed in this podcast occur. And I think it was very insightful while we have used coronavirus as a base, but it was a very insightful conversation. Everybody operating in the food supply chain should really or could benefit out of this. We'll make sure that as many people on the planet gets access to this. Thank you so much, Dr. David, and we look forward to having more from you coming period.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. I really enjoyed the conversation.